Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 59, Women in the Mormon Church, with our guest via Skype, Debra Jenson. Hey Debra, welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So for the sake of our audience, can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Debra Jenson. I am from Utah. I am a Mormon, and I am the chair of the board for a group called Ordain Women. We are an organization that is advocating publicly for women to be ordained to the priesthood inside the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And when I'm not doing that, I am a professor of journalism and communication at Utah State University. Go Aggies. Or I'm watching my kids play soccer and football, because that's what I do.
Awesome. So, in deference to my audience, which is a very wide and varied religious audience, stemming from pagans to Christians, can you give the short version of what Mormonism is?
Sure. Mormonism is a Christian tradition that came about in the 1800s when Joseph Smith was a young boy. He wanted to join a church, and the story goes that he prayed about which church to join. He took the challenge from the Bible in James that said, "Ask and it will be given to you." He prayed about it, and he was told specifically not to join any church, that he had a larger work to do. So Mormonism is born of this idea that revelation continues, and that Joseph Smith's work was then, for the rest of his life, the next 30 years, 25 years, he spent building this church and he received the golden plates, which were another testament of Jesus Christ, and he translated those. Those became the Book of Mormon, which is another book of scripture that we read. We as a people have been around continuously. This branch of Joseph Smith's church has been around continuously since his martyrdom. And we're a church now that has about 15 million members worldwide. We are a rapidly growing church, particularly outside the United States now. We're actually, though most people think of Mormonism as white people from Utah, that's right. What I think of when I think of it. Right. We're actually a majority people of color from outside the United States now. And one of our most important teachings is that we have a living, expanding doctrine, that we have 13 articles of faith that lay out the basic tenets of our beliefs. And one of them is that God is still speaking to people on this earth, and that as people are ready, that the gospel will grow and will change. And so that's one of my favorite parts about it. I always like to put that in when I describe it.
Awesome.
Let's see. Does that cover it? I guess probably the other thing that's pretty big, particularly in conversations about ordained women, is that Mormonism's seat of power, our Vatican per se, is in Salt Lake City, Utah. We have a first presidency led by a man we believe to be a prophet, Thomas S. Monson. That's probably structurally the most important thing.
Well, did you grow up Mormon, or did you come to Mormonism later in life?
Sort of yes to both. My biological parents were a lapsed Mormon and a Catholic. And when they divorced when I was very young, no one in my family was religious. I grew up I have one set of grandparents who are Mormon and one set of grandparents who are devout Catholics, and I adore all four of them. They're amazing people. But when I was a kid, I grew up without any religious experience, really. I was always a joiner, and I wanted something. So I remember, I think I was 10 or 11. I started, I asked my biological father to take me to mass. I went to Mormon church with my grandparents. I tried a couple of my friends' churches. And the big thing that I really loved was, this is so silly, but Mormons do a thing called Girls Camp every year. Mm-hmm. And teenagers, girls 12 to 18, they get to go away for like a week and they camp. And I wanted to camp. So I went to girls camp with them. And they, I really fell in love with the people. And then they challenged me to read the Book of Mormon and to do some other things. And by the time I was 13, I had spent the summer reading that book, and my journals are hilarious from it. Because I in my journals, like I still have them and I read them in there. So I'm reading this thing. I really like church. And I guess the book is kind of cool. I like how I feel when I read it, but I just don't know about this Joseph Smith stuff. But by the time I was 14, I was all in. I was attending every week. I fell in love with it. There are these things for the teenage girls. They're the young women values, and I can still recite them. They're faith, divine nature, individual worth, knowledge, choice and accountability, good works and integrity. And every one of them they spoke to me. I loved the idea that I was a daughter of heavenly parents who knew me as an individual and knew my little quirks and idiosyncrasies and my faults and my talents. And they made me this specific person to come here for a specific thing. I just probably as a child of divorce, I fell in love with that idea and felt so inspired and empowered by it. It became one of my favorite things. Like I said, I mean, it's been 25 years and I can still say it recite it in my head at rapid speed.
Right.
But yeah, so I was I was committed 100%. I dated lots of boys who ended up serving LDS missions. I was a regular at the Salt Lake City airport saying goodbye to my most newest love. And then I married a returned missionary. He's a lifelong member. We got married in the Salt Lake Temple, and we've been married for almost 20 years and attend church on Sundays more than we don't. So yeah, it's who I am.
What led you to start Ordain Women, and what was the moment that you knew you had to start this organization?
Well, I didn't start it, but it was actually founded by a group of, I think the numbers vary, just a really large group, 30 women initially. We get on these conference calls, women who are BYU students learning about social justice. BYU is the church's official private institute, college, right, university. Right. Anyway, just for context there. So you had some of these women who met at BYU and found out that they weren't the only feminists attending the school. You had women who've been Mormon feminists and writing about it for 30 years, and writing about women's ordination, having this conversation. And they decided that what they were going to do was create this website, ordainwomen.org. And on this website, they were going to invite Mormon women or women interested in Mormonism for any reason, who to publicly declare that they believe women should be ordained inside the LDS Church, which was groundbreaking. And this was just 2.5 years ago. No one had these conversations. It was the most taboo of topics. For me personally, like I said, I came to the church as a teenager and have always been a feminist. One of my favorite stories is that I got in a fight with my second grade teacher over the Declaration of Independence because I was absolutely adamant that all men are created equal was sexist and I wasn't going to memorize it. And
awesome.
My mom, they called my mom and they were like, what is going on? And I remember my mom talking to me and finally she looked at the teacher and was like, I didn't do this. You deal with her. So I've always been a feminist. It just, when I came to the church at the age of 12 years old is when all young men in the Mormon church are ordained to the lowest priesthood. They're all ordained a deacon in the Aaronic priesthood. They are given the opportunity to pass the sacrament, which is similar to our communions, the most important ordinance that we participate in every Sunday. And there was nothing for the girls. And I remember looking at these boys, I went to school with some of these kids, these guys that were being ordained and being given this expansive opportunity. And I remember asking, like, okay, what do I have to do that? Because I've always been a joiner, but I've also always been somebody who looks at like the next rung on the ladder. Right. How do I get to be the boss? I like to boss people around. And I was informed that women, deacons learn they get to pass the sacrament. They get to collect the fast offerings, which are tithes. They get to help care for the meeting house. They get to serve as the messenger in church meetings for the bishop. Girls that age get to serve as their class president for other girls. And it just goes on from there. When boys turn 14, they're automatically ordained a teacher. They get to then prepare and pass the sacrament. They get to help serve as a home teacher, which is a priesthood duty. They assist adults. Girls get to serve as class presidents. At the age of 16, boys become priests and they get to baptize, which is taking someone into the waters of baptism and making them a member of our church. They get to administer the sacrament and bless it. And girls get to serve as class president, which means like at 13, I was looking at these kids and thinking, I will never have the same opportunities to serve my congregation. And then I was looking at my young women leaders who I just absolutely thought were these amazing women because they were. And I realized they would never get to do the same things and serve their congregation in the same way that 12-year-old boys were. So it had always grated on me. It had always been something. And when I spoke to my leaders, when I spoke to people in private, they were always like, pray about it. The Mormon answer is always pray about it and you'll have comfort and you'll receive your own revelation to know that this is okay. And I prayed about it and I prayed about it and it just bothered me. And then as an adult, my son, I had a son when I was 21. By the time he was 12, the day he was ordained a deacon was one of the hardest days I've ever had at church. Because this is a long story. I'm sorry. This is a really long answer, but
that's okay.
So my entire family, my husband's entire family all comes to church, to Mormon church. My family's not LDS. They all come, they get dressed up, they come to this thing. It's this big deal. We go into this room where my son is going to be ordained and a bunch of men, my husband, his father, his brothers, stand in a circle with a bunch of men my son doesn't really know from our congregation. No one in my family is LDS, so they can't participate. I am a devout, believing woman. I am not allowed to participate. He's surrounded by these men, and they bestow this transformative power to him in our beliefs, right? One of the most important days of his life, and I am not allowed to be a part of it. I was literally pushed against the wall while these relative strangers were doing this thing for him, laying their hands on his head and proclaiming a blessing. And then when it was done, he stands up and he's this awkward 12-year-old and they're all shaking his hands. And he got to me like I was like the 9th or 10th person that he talked to. I was basically there to make sure his white shirt was ironed and tucked in, and then to give everybody food after. And I had never felt so useless. And it just, the more I prayed about it, the more I felt like this just is not right. I'm not a creative person. So I just sat and was mad about it.
Right.
So anyway, on March 17th, 20th, something like that, 2013 would be right. Yeah. Somebody sent me a message on Facebook. I don't remember who it was. Somebody sent me a message on Facebook that said, have you seen this? And it had like 8 exclamation points and question marks after. And it was a link to the Ordain Women website. And I thought, I wish I knew who it was. I should go back and check. But I looked at it. As soon as I opened up the website, I was like, oh, like in Mormonism, we talk about like a burning in your bosom or feeling the spirit. And as soon as I opened it up, I felt like this pull. And I read there were 26 profiles, 26 faces with their names saying things like I served an LDS mission. I'm an active Mormon woman and I believe women should be ordained. I read every profile because first of all, I couldn't get enough of it. And second, I wanted to make sure, because I knew that that this was where I was supposed to be, I wanted to make sure it wasn't some group of crazy anti-Mormon people, like that I was being tricked into it. I knew these were my people. Mm-hmm. Like I had found my home. Like 2:00 that night, I wrote up my profile. I picked the photographs I was going to put on there. The next day, my husband and I both got home from work and I sat him down and I said, I saw this thing and I need you to know that I feel really strongly that this is the answer to my decades of prayer about this. And I have to be a part of it, but it might get me in trouble. And I need to know that you have my back, that you're okay with it. And I told him, I said, I'm not asking your permission, but I'm asking for your blessing, like your support. And he did not he did not blink an eye. He said, absolutely. If this is what you have to do, you have to do it. Awesome. And I submitted my profile. I think I was like the second person who was not in that initial 26 that they, to submit my profile. And, my involvement with Ordained Women only increased from there because I was local to Utah, and I was willing to put my face out there. So that's how I got involved. And then I literally just tripped into it. I was not an organizer. I was not one of the founders. And yet now I'm like one of the faces of it.
But that's awesome though. I mean, it's always good, at least to me in my thoughts, is that if you find a group that works for you and as far as your social justice work is concerned, then, if it's feeling right, then you're in the right place. Yep.
Yeah. And I met some of the other organizers, Kate Kelly, one of the founders. I met them, about a month later, maybe even only 3 weeks later, and was so afraid to meet them, thinking, oh, are these just going to be a bunch of bananas women? Right. But it seems like they were no more bananas than I am. So this has been my tribe ever since, because it's been incredibly difficult in my religious community. And I've had to kind of find a new social and support structure for my worship and my service. And it's Ordained Women. Those people, they've been that for me.
Mm-hmm. While you're talking, it's always been interesting to me because I've known several Mormons over the years, and actually I have a very good friend who lives in Utah who was kind of like, she wasn't necessarily anti-religion, but she was kind of like, rawr, I'm going to do religion my way, rawr. And, I should probably hook you guys up. I think you'd get along fine. But, yeah. She turned to Mormonism because for her children primarily, but she also kind of is one of those people that likes to join something to change it from within. Yep. But what I'm finding really interesting is that there's a real mix in Mormonism, at least from the Mormons that I've known, of very progressive people who really want to change the world and change how things are, and conservatives. And it seems like it's kind of like a pendulum that swings back and forth, or like kind of two sides of the religion and that people don't really see that diversity in the mainstream press.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think most progressive Mormons would probably argue that the reason you don't see progressive Mormons really in the press or represented in the church is because in order to move up the hierarchy, you have to be a man. Mm-hmm. Right. And we've pretty much demonstrated consistently that in order to reach the upper echelons of leadership, you have to be a white man. from mostly from Utah, largely from the United States. We have one general authority who's from Germany, and we just got a presiding bishop who's from France. But other than that, you're talking about white men who've been operating in this structure for so long that you're kind of rewarded for that conservative viewpoint, and which is not to say that they're not good, solid men who, want to do right, but just to say that we as a group, this is me being an amateur sociologist, we as a group have experienced persecution. We came to Utah to escape the United States government after our leader and his brother had been murdered. Like, we were kind of chased across the plains and found, what we laughingly refer to as, a place that no one else, in air quotes, civilized, wanted to live, right? There were plenty of native indigenous people here. We were not super great with them either, but we came, we came here looking for a place to be our own. So we're very good. That makes us a population that's very good at two things. One, making more Mormons.
Right.
So we make more Mormons who we then raise up from birth in this, and it becomes a defining thing. And so you don't really want to change that a lot of times. But we're also very good at circling the wagons and identifying threats and either keeping those threats out or removing them if they're from the inside. So there's that part of it. But then there's the part that I think a lot of progressives like me, like what drew me to this church was the idea that you're supposed to be an individual. You're supposed to be unique. You're supposed to be quirky. And here's this other really cool doctrinal part that says you have a direct line to God, to a heavenly Father and a heavenly mother. We don't talk about her very much, but
interesting.
She's very important. You have a direct line to these heavenly parents who sent you here, and you can ask them questions and ask for guidance, and they are going to help you. You get to receive. We talk about personal revelation all the time. So for a lot of people, and this may be considered like sacrilegious to more conservative Mormons, I know it is, but for me, I look at this and say, look, I'm allowed to ask questions even about existing church doctrine and policies. I'm allowed to ask those questions for me and see what my role is there. And if my role is to raise my hand and sustain that and be a part of it and be super committed to that, then I will. But if my conscience or my, social justice, feelings or my revelation, whatever term you want to use for it, says, no, that part's not right, and here's what it should be, I also have a right to say that publicly. And actually, I personally view it as a responsibility that we as a group of people have dropped the ball on. We've become lazy in that way. So yeah, you get this blend of like very liberal or very conservative, but you only hear from the conservatives usually.
Although, it's really fascinating because I just heard, was it yesterday or the day before, that the head of the church, if I'm remembering what I heard about this article correctly, was basically saying, and specifically about gay marriage, which, with the whole Prop 8 thing, California thing, I know blew up into this big thing.
Yeah, we have not been traditionally very nice with that specific topic.
Right. But I just recently heard about an article where the head of the church was like, well, if it's the law of the land, then we need to obey it. And that's pretty much it. And
yeah. I
was just like, wow, it seems like there's a lot of evolution going on.
We have, if you look at that talk, just absolutely, like it broke the internet for progressive Mormons. We went crazy over that because it was Elder Dallin H. Oaks. He's a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, which is they're the presiding 12 over the church. They support the First Presidency, which are 3 men who are supposed to receive revelation for the church. But the Quorum of the 12, they're big, right? We teach kids, we show them their pictures and they memorize their names because these are the men who speak for God to us. Right. And Dallin H. Oaks used to be on the Utah State Supreme Court. He's a jurist and a legal scholar and has been problematic for a lot of people like me because his arguments around marriage equality specifically have felt really disingenuous. They've been hard to hear for anyone who believes in equality or has LGBTQIA people that they love. Some of his rhetoric has been really, really tough. So to hear him say that in a talk was really, it was hopeful for a lot of us. Like, oh, good, we're evolving. It was also, some of us were like, yeah, no kidding, because it's one of the articles of faith that we believe in being subject to kings and rulers. Like, we believe in following the law. So a lot of us were like, you shouldn't have had to tell us that.
Right. Kind of like, duh.
Yeah. We were all like, we've been saying this for a while. We're glad you finally came around. Do we get credit for helping you figure that out? It's also, though, it brings up this other this other thing where, and I am by no means an expert on it, although I have followed it closely because as part of my militant feminism, I've been a marriage equality advocate for as long as I can remember. Like, I remember in high school, my first friend who told me he was gay, I was like, yay, I can't wait to come to your wedding. And he was like, no, that's not how it works in the 90s. Anyway, our stance, the church's position on homosexuality and LGBTQIA rights and on marriage equality has seen such a rapid shift in, just over the last, like you said, over 7 years, 7 years since Prop 8?
Yeah, and about that, yeah.
Then where we were actively campaigning and using church directories and encouraging people in our church meetings to go out and actively campaign against marriage equality. To today, in Utah, there is an anti-discrimination law on the books that was publicly supported by the church's hierarchy. Now, it does have its own little quirks and problems to it. It includes a religious freedom exemption, which is a problem for me. But the fact that the church would even be active in that conversation is big. That we've shifted our rhetoric away from, in the early 80s, one of the most prominent members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, Boyd K. Packer, identified 3 threats, the 3 prime evils in the world that were threats to the church. And they were feminists, intellectuals, and homosexuals. That we've gone from that to a website that's sponsored by the church called Mormons and Gays, where we discuss, we've acknowledged that being gay is not a choice. It's something that you're born with, and that parents shouldn't throw their kids out because that's what Mormons have done in the past. It's been a real transformation, and it's been good to see. It's been frustratingly slow for people who are on the ground and having to deal with the aftermath of it. But it's been really incredibly fast in terms of a major group run by a bunch of old white men completely changing their mind on something. Not completely, but.
Well, yeah, it's been really amazing. And do you think maybe it's because of the way, I guess to put it one way, is the way that Mormonism was founded? At least in my mind, it seems like it was an evolution of Christianity in a sense, at least according to the founders,
Right.
So, maybe there's a little bit of okayness with an evolution of the tradition because of the way that it was founded.
Yeah. If somebody looked at if you could time travel, I'm sure the first place you would want to go is like one of the very first meetings of the official organized LDS church, right?
Right.
Right. That's exactly where I would go. But if you could see and hear many of the teachings and the doctrine, a lot of the stuff is the same over this, almost 200 years. A lot of it's very similar, but there are some really important things that are completely different. We believe in the 9th article of faith. We believe all that God has revealed, all that he has yet to reveal, all that he does reveal, and that he'll reveal lots of really cool stuff, right? It doesn't say that word for word, but that's basically what it's telling you. Like, really cool stuff is going to come if you guys get ready and listen and ask and then listen again, right? So it's always been a part of us. And we have, as a people, we have forgotten that. I hear daily from Mormons who think that I am a threat to the church because I believe that it's okay for me to say, I think women should be ordained, and I'm asking the leadership of the church to start praying about and asking this question. And I get so many people who tell me the doctrine doesn't change. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Of course the doctrine changes. What is the thing everyone knows about Mormonism? What is the one thing everybody knows? I met people from the Parliament of World Religions over the weekend, people from around the world. The one thing every person from Egypt to Israel to Arkansas asked me about, polygamy. Right?
That's just like, oh, yeah, here comes the polygamy thing.
Yeah, because it's the one thing everybody knows. Because, we made movies about how Mormons were going to come and steal your wives. Because, polygamy is this thing that everybody knows, except Mormons in a lot of ways. But, I always like to point out to people, like, Mormonism was a church that believed in one man and one woman being married, until Joseph Smith shared this revelation that he had. And all of a sudden, we're a church that believes in and practices polygamy and polyandry. Like, Joseph Smith was married to women who were still married to other men, right?
Oh, wow.
So then we have this shift where all of a sudden, because of direct revelation, we believe in polygamy. And polygamy becomes the defining characteristic of our church for decades.
Right.
And it brings us to Utah, and it defines the struggle for this territory to either become its own country or eventually to become a state in the Union. And polygamy is like this defining moment where, when we want to become a state, the United States government, this is a very simple way to put this, but says, until you stop practicing polygamy, you don't get to become a state. And that external pressure, combined with whatever else happens, becomes the impetus or the catalyst for our leadership at the time to pray about it. And they receive a new revelation and say, guess what? No more polygamy. And I have a picture of my great-great-great-great-grandfather in stripes because he went to jail for continuing to practice polygamy.
Wow.
Once it was, and that's about as legitimately Mormon as you can get.
Right.
Like, that is street cred. So polygamy now, so this idea that nothing can change in the church is actually anathema to everything that the founding of the church and to our history. We are a church of change and growth and expansion and rapid reversals, which I think is scary to some people, and also becomes, makes the church suspect to people who aren't LDS. But to me, I think it's just the beauty of the church. I think it's incredibly progressive and has the possibility to make this place, which claims to be a place that receives the word of God directly for this day, right? Has the potential to be a leader in progressive movements and social justice. We're not that yet, but I can always hope.
It's like most other, reform movements. You see, I mean, the Reformation itself was a similar kind of thing. Like, hey, we don't like what the Catholic Church is doing, so we're going to do our own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, Mormonism was the next step, at least in the Americas, of a similar idea. Like, hey, we're going to do our own thing because, you know, we think we need to be doing this. And so, you know, evolution and change for Christianity itself is not a new thing, although it just seems like people get stuck in this idea that, you know, one type of Christianity has existed for the last 2,000 years. And it's like, no. The Christianity of Jesus, of post-Jesus, just after Jesus passed, you know, is quite different from the Christianity that we know now.
Well, yeah, I mean, oh, yeah. I met somebody, a priest from the Independent Catholic Church of America. Mm-hmm. I think that's what it was called. I probably just butchered that. Anyway, very lovely man. I met him over the weekend, and we were speaking about this exact thing. And he said, "Did you know that there are 30,000 different Christian denominations around the world? That's a lot of ways to interpret the words of one person and the 12 people he called, right?" And I look at people, we get this argument all the time at Ordain Women that we only ordain men because Jesus only ordained men. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and grant you that premise. I'm going to give you that one because I like you and you're my friend and we're sitting in, Relief Society on Sunday together. I'm going to be like, okay, yeah. So Jesus only ordained men. Cool. Jesus also only ordained adult Jewish men, not 12-year-old boys from Lehi, Utah.
Right.
Right. So let's go ahead and just acknowledge that the people we ordain now, or the people that we look at as representatives of Jesus Christ, do not look like the people that Jesus would have called in his time, in his day. So, and if it did, then, you wouldn't have been able to fulfill his prophecy that his gospel would fill all the corners of the earth, right? That it would go around the world. You have to expand. You have to allow for change and growth and modernization. Jesus didn't use the internet either. That doesn't mean it's of the devil.
Right. Yeah.
So there's this way of looking at progressive stuff as a gift from God or as a barrier to it. I choose to think that Netflix is a gift from God.
Right. I agree with that.
Has been for me.
Oh, us too. I mean, being able to get rid of TV and all those ads. Hooray.
It's amazing. Although I think I spend more time in front of my TV watching Netflix than I ever spent watching just regular TV. But that's because you can't get enough Doctor Who in one day. So.
That is true. That is very true. Do you see a future for women's ordination in the Mormon Church? And do you think it'll happen within your lifetime?
Oh, that is such a good question. Yes, I do. And there's so many different ways to answer that. We progressive Mormons have a game where we listen to the messages that are given to us during General Conference twice a year for 2 days. We get 8 hours of talks, plus 3 others in gendered meetings. So we get almost a dozen hours of just messages directly from our leaders to us about what they think is important at the time. And it's almost an Olympic sport amongst progressive Mormons on the internet, dissecting these talks and trying to find out what the actual message is, what they're telling you. So this talk is about how wonderful women are, but are they actually telling you that they see women in a more progressive way than the body of the church seems to, which is in traditional gender roles? Or are they telling us, look out, we're going to bring the hammer down on you, stop asking questions, So we have this whole thing, and we've identified people who are on our team and not on our team in terms of look at this in, let's be more progressive, let's be more open to people, and no, let's protect the flock. Let's keep these threats out. I'm actually okay. Like, I understand both arguments. Mm-hmm. I understand why people look at someone like me saying women should be ordained as a threat to the people who, to their church, to their organization, because they don't understand it. It's new. It's scary. It is me, in a way, saying what we have now is not enough. And that's unfortunate. So first of all, I believe firmly that there are people already in leadership of my church who may not totally agree with me, but are moving. They are moving along a spectrum. 20 years ago, you never would have heard it. You just didn't hear our talks that said it was okay for women to work outside the home. When I got married in the temple, that just was it was shocking to people that I was going to continue going to school because I had a husband now, and weren't we going to start having babies, and I was going to stay home with them. Never mind that I'm a terrible mother, that I do not belong at home with my children. I have zero patience. Their father is actually the nurturer in our family. So the fact that our rhetoric has already shifted in ways, and we have seen over the last 3 years some small but important cosmetic changes in the church, in our church, the way that women are represented and the way that women are included, from, really honestly, just cosmetic symbolic changes. Like, we now have the 9 women who serve in leadership roles over the general church. There are 9 women who they serve in leadership roles over the organizations that serve women and children only. Okay. Mm-hmm. So there are 9 women and there are 113 men. These 9 women now sit on the stand at General Conference in very prominent places so that we can see them. I know that sounds like such a little thing, but it's actually really big when you think about my daughter, who's 10, watching conference with me, now does not just see a series of white men in suits. She sees, oh, look, 9 women, and they are seated in positions that give them the image of having authority. Women are included in the organizational chart that shows the leadership of the church. That's big. 2 years ago, 2.5, a woman prayed in General Conference for the first time. Wow. And now it happens all the time. I mean, it happens at every conference. We have at least 1 or 2 prayers by women. That's huge. It also, some people could choose to look at it and say, you didn't have a woman pray in your General Conference until 2013. That's really not progressive. But there, we have seen some changes. I think those are, they're positive and they give me some sense of optimism. I also I'm somebody who I want to believe that my leaders are listening to me. I want to believe that when I say things, that when I pray, that it actually moves in some small way hearts, right? If I pray, that it matters. Mm-hmm. So, so there's that. And then there's just, the nuts and bolts. We know that the church is hemorrhaging young women. Women aged 18 to 25, actually, to be more specific, are leaving the church in numbers we've never seen before. Mm-hmm. They don't, you don't grow up in 2015 and look at an organization that does not allow you any sort of ecclesiastical or structural authority. And you're just not okay with that. I know my daughters, it's a complete no-brainer for them. In fact, they're the reason their dad was like, yeah, you have to do this, because they were asking him and he couldn't answer any of their questions about why they won't ever have the priesthood. And so it's going to have to change. There's just no way around it. You cannot be an organization that allows less than half of your population to serve fully and continue to thrive. that may have worked in, pre-19th Amendment United States when women didn't have the right to own property or vote. That might have worked. It just doesn't work anymore. The world has changed, and God's people should change with it in those ways.
Absolutely. And it's, similar things that I agree with. And I've heard about other, all male priesthoods like the Roman Catholic Church or in some of the other denominations of Protestantism. It's like, you have half of your population that's not represented in the clergy. And, and especially, when you're talking about aspects of ministry where, a woman is raped or a woman is abused, for a lot of women, it would be difficult to go to a male priest because, that's the symbol for a lot of abuse. That's the symbol of the abuse.
Exactly.
And, it just seems, it seems logical to me, but then again, I'm both Wiccan and Christian. So, I'm in a denomination of Christianity that, has a female cisgendered, lesbian priest, as the bishop. So, I'm kind of okay with this whole women in the priesthood thing.
Yeah. It's, again, the Parliament of World Religions was in Salt Lake City last weekend. It was wonderful. Ordain Women was there. I was on a few panels. I moderated a panel, brought in some women from, I brought a woman named Leslie Sachs, who is the executive director of Women of the Wall in Israel.
I interviewed someone from Women of the Wall a few weeks ago.
Oh my, they're amazing. Okay. They're, let's just agree that they are absolutely the coolest people in the world. So Leslie Sachs came, a woman, Dr. Layla Al-Mariati came. She's a Muslim woman who advocates for women's rights around the world and was the former spokesperson for the the Muslim Women's League, I think is the name of it. And then Jane Vaya, who is an ordained Roman Catholic priest.
Right.
She runs her own independent parish. Mm-hmm. And these women, Dr. Mariati got up and said the most absolutely insightful and painful thing. And she said, she served on President Clinton's U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. And she said, I've served on so many interfaith councils around the world and in the United States. And the one thing that runs through each Abrahamic tradition is mistreatment and misuse of their women. Mm-hmm. And we just cannot continue to be blind to the problems that it creates. Like I said, Mormonism is a majority of our members are outside the United States. They're in South America. They're on the African continent. When we as an organization, as a structure, perpetuate the idea that women are not fit to lead, that women are not fit to handle finances, that women are not capable of and are not deserving of respect in an actual, institutional way, not just lip service. Don't tell me how great we are. Show us that you trust us and will work with us and let us lead too. When we do that, when we perpetuate those ideas around the world, we are partially responsible for the subjugation of women culturally and socially in their governments. Until religions step up and say, this will no longer be acceptable. God does not accept that women are less than.
Right.
Secular organizations will continue to do it because they drive each other. Right? I live in Utah. I have a very privileged life here. I am white. I am married. I am Mormon in Utah. Mm-hmm. Married to a white man who's also Mormon in Utah, right? Like, I have privilege coming out of my eyeballs. Right. At the same time, I live in a place where women in Utah, the wage gap is worse. For white women, think how much worse it is for women of color in Utah.
Yeah, or trans women.
Yeah, or trans women. I mean, we just had a trans woman in my university town who walked in front of a bus or a truck. committed suicide because we treat women so poorly here, right? Her experience was just, she couldn't handle it anymore. It was terrible.
Right.
So women in Utah start college at the same rates as women around the country, but they graduate. We're in the basement. We are the worst place, the worst state to be a woman in the country by any measure, education level, ability to make your own choices, happiness. We're the most heavily medicated state for women. And you can't tell me that the fact that we are also ground zero for Mormonism and have such a high content, we're about 70% of the state's population is LDS. They are so interconnected.
Right.
That until we find ways to allow our heavenly parents to empower women in the church, they will not feel empowered in their lives. And I don't care if women think they have it all or not. Like so many Mormon women, especially in Utah, will tell you they don't want the priesthood. They don't want this. They're happy. And I think that's great and fine. But guess what? The numbers don't add up.
Right.
Like the numbers say we're not as happy as we think we are. We're not as satisfied as we think we are. And I don't believe I was sent here to live this life to be miserable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, and it's true too, priesthood is not for everybody. And I, I think that's pretty fine if you don't want to be a priest, but, it just having the option is liberating.
Right.
As a woman, as a queer person, as a trans person, as any other marginalized group. Yep. I mean, it's I do know that it hasn't been all that long, where African Americans could be part of the priesthood. That's right?
It's been 37 years since people of color, men of color were allowed to hold the priesthood, and since women of color were allowed to enter the temple. We denied access to our most important saving ordinances to people based on their race as late as 1978.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people don't realize this about Mormonism. So again, for your audience, I'm going to lay down a little context here.
Okay.
Mormonism priesthood in our church is not the same as in most churches. It is not, an occupation. It is not something you generally feel called to and go and study in. We have a lay priesthood across the board. Okay. Mm-hmm. The person who leads your local congregation of about 300 people is called a bishop. That person is not a professional clergyman. That person is like an accountant or a teacher or an insurance salesman 5 days out of the week and is a bishop on Sunday and in the evenings, but does all the things that you would expect a professional clergy person to do. Here's your confessions, manages tithes, runs the organization, sets decides what's going to be spoken about in the meetings. And so for us, it's not the same for women in the Mormon church. The fight to have priesthood access is like, we're talking about, my son is 17 and he has more ecclesiastical and administerial or like structural power and authority than I will ever have. Mm-hmm. Because we automatically ordain any man.
Right.
It's so depressing. Like when my youngest, when she turned 8 and was ready to be baptized, that's the age of accountability for Mormons. It's the age that we baptize you. You get to choose to be baptized, and you then become a member of the church. When she was 8, the list of people who would have been authorized by the church to take her into the water and baptize her included her 16-year-old brother.
Oh, wow.
But did not include me. So my son baptized my daughter. I, on the other hand, am not considered worthy to participate in that in any way. We have to have, each baptism requires that 2 people serve as official witnesses to make sure that the baptismal prayer was read correctly, that the person was fully immersed in the water and everything. Those people have to be men too, just to sit with your eyeballs and watch the thing happen.
Wow.
Now I could watch, but I couldn't be the official representative who said, yes, that was done correctly and welcome to the fold.
Mm-hmm.
So ordination is, you're 100% right. Like, this idea of not ordaining women makes religious experiences, makes confessional experiences, places where you want a faith, someone to guide you through the lens of your faith. It makes it so much harder for women. So much harder. For Mormons, it's this other level of 12-year-old boys who can't be bothered to wash their gym clothes are allowed to pass the sacrament to me, but I am not allowed to pass the sacrament. And that just adds a little, it's an extra little, it's like salt in the wound right. Sometimes for me, because I look at these kids and I think, yeah. I love them and they're great and they're just adorable. But at the same time, so are my daughters.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the youth that are in the Mormon church now, do you think, because I know from other youth, especially in spiritual circles, a lot of these struggles are kind of like, why are you guys so hung up on this? There have been certain struggles in the pagan community that I've done some work around, and most of the youth are kind of like, my friends, queer trans friends could be in this, and my queer trans friends can do this, and women can do that, and why are you guys all getting your panties in a bunch about this? Do you see more the Mormon youth having that kind of mindset, why are we still arguing about this?
So they just think it, like you said, it's a no-brainer. They don't understand why someone's pushing back on these, or for us,
or why women still aren't part of the priesthood.
Oh yeah, that's a hard one because I live in the heart of Mormonism, and so if you're going to meet diehard Mormons, right. You're either going to meet them in Utah in specific pockets, or you're going to meet them in places outside of Utah where there are large concentrations of Mormons, like Southern California has some, Arizona. So we're this interesting group where there's always this joke that the church is different in Utah than it is anywhere out in the mission field is what we call it.
Right.
So if you're a Mormon in Boston, a lot of this stuff is, we're just going to figure out a way to make it work, and people shouldn't be, women should be ordained, and it's not that controversial. You can wear pants to church, ladies. That's another big one. But here in Utah, I see it's just like with the adults. There's either you are, this is important and we should be talking about it, and why are we still talking about it? Mm-hmm. Why haven't we just done this already? Mm-hmm. Or you get kids who have learned the lines and know what they're supposed to say, or know they've internalized everything and they can just say them back. Mormons are very good at organizing and at teaching. So we have a really strong program for kids. From the moment you are 5, you attend an hour of religious instruction primary every Sunday. Mm-hmm. And then you get an hour of sharing time, which is all the little kids together. And then you get an hour of sacrament meeting, which is with your parents. So your 3 hours of church for your entire life will teach you some things pretty quickly, right? We teach you lots of songs, and you learn to recite all the articles of faith. And then when you hit 9th grade, when you hit high school age, every Mormon has the chance in Utah to attend seminary as an hour of outside of public school, right? So in the middle of the day, you're excused for an hour of public school to walk across the street to an LDS building and get Mormon seminary instruction.
Wow.
Yeah. It's quite the setup if you don't want to go to school.
Right.
But so kids, kids, my son is a senior in high school. Kids his age have gone to 4 years of every, like 3 or 4 hours a week instruction in school where they're learning the lines. And you learn pretty quickly what you should and shouldn't say in those classes. And just like with any other group, if you step out of line, there are social consequences. So I think young people in our church, I have a tremendous amount of respect and hope for the young people in our church who are already vocal about it. But I think we do such a good job of teaching them how to follow. We forget to teach them how to think about it critically. But then there's also, we've lowered the missionary age. So it used to be back in my day that men went on missions at the age of 19. I call them men at 19, which is shocking. Right. And women went at the age of 21. And this is a full-time mission where you leave your family. You really, you only write them letters. You don't get to visit. You're gone for 2 years if you're a man and 18 months if you're a woman. Which that age gap is a really important age gap because it meant that by the time a 21-year-old man came back, and one of the first things he was told was go get married, right? Mm-hmm. So you can make more Mormons. So go get married. And so by the time a guy is 21 and coming back, his age group of women that he's dating haven't gone on a mission yet, right? So lots of women didn't go on missions who were my age. I didn't go on a mission because I met somebody to marry instead. They've lowered those ages. Now, young men, boys, they can leave when they're 18. You get lots of kids who are graduated from high school and they already have their mission call. They leave 2 weeks after graduation.
Wow.
And women, girls, can now go at the age of 19. It was a huge shift, and it created, women signed up in droves. The church, actually, they said we were not at all prepared for the number of Mormon women missionaries that signed up. The rates went up. I don't have the numbers, but it went up. I think it more than doubled. Okay. Wow. So these women are going out now. They're going out in the mission fields. They are experiencing independence before they get married. I did not. I left my home that I grew up in and went straight to the home I was married in.
Wow.
So these women are living out independently. They're preaching the gospel. They are being given certain types of leadership roles over other women missionaries. They are never allowed to supervise male missionaries, though. But so they're experiencing all of this, right? Imagine what that does. There's a reason we're losing these young women, because then they come home and they're expected to conform to traditional gender roles that are very Western, US centric. They are no longer really allowed to lead in any way. They do not experience this independent, this sense of, I get to make my own choices. I get to be my captain of my own ship kind of situation. And the church is going to have to change in order to keep these women there, to let them feel challenged, to let them feel a part of it. And I can't imagine, because I didn't go on a mission, what it feels like to come back from one now as a woman. I just can't. I know what it feels like to be a woman who just came to this by my, rights of my own angry feminism as a child. I can't imagine what it would be like to be a woman who had some of this, had a taste of this authority and ability to minister to people, and then have it taken away. They're going to have to change because they're going to have created a new group of people who will challenge them.
Right.
And it will be led by young people.
I think you're right. I have very high hopes for young people that I've met, and, especially right now, because they're an interesting bunch, I think.
They are.
I think they're going to do a lot of change for the world, and I think it's going to be good.
Yeah. I look at my kids and I think, these are kids that grew up with Will and Grace on TV. They don't know a world without openly gay characters being okay. My kids don't know a world without Neil Patrick Harris being just the freaking most adorable family in the world, right? They don't know a world without that. They don't know a world without Hillary Clinton running for president. It is, I am going to sound like an old lady here. I'm not even 40 yet. And I remember hosting a viewing party for the episode when Ellen came out because it was groundbreaking. I remember being over the moon when Geraldine Ferraro was named the vice presidential candidate for a major party. These kinds of things are, I don't want us to think that they're just regular everyday occurrences and that they didn't happen without struggle. But for me, these like important flashpoints in my memory are nothing to my kids because they grew up in a world where equality is just the thing. Now, does that mean there's not lots of work to do? No. But I have so much more hope for this next generation, for my white male Mormon son who can look at himself and recognizes that he has privilege his friends don't, who are people of color. And they've already talked about like, okay, you guys, if we get pulled over, like I'm the one that has to talk to them because you guys will be in danger and I won't. Like the fact that he recognizes that stuff, this is a generation that I think will do amazing things.
Awesome.
And they'll do it all from their phones.
Right. Well, on that note, we're just about out of time. So if people would like to get in touch with you to talk about ordained women or talk about women in the Mormon Church or any of the topics we talked about in this interview, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, to get in touch with my organization, the best way is to visit our website, which is ordainwomen.org. And we're on Facebook as well. We, at Ordain Women, I think that's what we're at. Geez, I should probably check that, huh? You can contact us through our website. Anybody's welcome to contact me through it's my name, Debra Jenson at hotmail.com. I don't really protect my email address very much. But, I'm happy to talk to anyone. We're Ordain Women on Facebook. And we welcome, anyone is welcome to submit a profile. You do not have to be a Mormon. You do not have to be an active Mormon. You can be a former Mormon. You can be someone who heard about it and believes that religious gender equality is important regardless of the denomination, because of the impact it has on communities and cultures. And we would love to hear from people.
Fantastic. And this has been a really fascinating interview. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. I loved talking with you.
Awesome. I'd like to thank Debra for joining us on This Week in Heresy. You can subscribe to This Week in Heresy via iTunes or the Stitcher app, or follow us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast. You can also financially support this podcast through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave me a message at thisweekinheresy.com.